I don't want no oil, a spoil in my shoreline. I like fish much better than crud. I like birds and things, a-creeping and crawling. Won't trade no more oil for blood. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that black demon oil's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. I don't want them nukes run by them kooks who think radioactivity is fun. No more three-headed frogs or kids with leukemia. Nuclear power ain't fit for a dog. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that nuclear power's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. No nukes! Good morning, Toledo, and good morning, Bowling Green. Good afternoon, Columbus, and hello to everyone on the internet, wherever and whenever you are. My name is Joe DeMare, and I'm here with my fantastic co-host,
Rebecca Wood.
Yes, and together Rebecca and I will be creating another hour of For a Green Future. And I want to especially welcome our first-time listeners who didn't realize this was, daylight savings time was ending and are listening to us by mistake, thinking that it's still, like 10 o'clock. But, well, welcome everyone.
Yeah.
Great. And so For Green Future is a show where we talk about ecology and the environment. And we talk about them in the ways that they affect you, your wealth, your health, your happiness, the wealth and health and happiness of your friends and your family and your coworkers, and the trees that are losing their leaves, and the fish that are spawning, swimming up the streams there in places like Alaska, and, the bears that are eating the fish, and the seagulls that are hanging out waiting to pick up the scraps the bears drop, and pretty much everybody and everything, because, like it or not, we're all together on this fantastic planet called Earth. We've got a really good show for you today. We are going to chat just for a few minutes here, for about another 10 minutes or so. And then we have a guest. We're having a guest fella named Rick Bailey, and he works for TARTA, Toledo Area Regional Transit Authority. He's going to tell us all about their plan to get electric buses in. Then we'll hear from our patrons. And after that, we hear from Rebecca. And Rebecca, what will you be talking to us about today?
I am doing a segment called Candy, 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 I Can't Let You Go.
All right. So perhaps inspired by the pounds and pounds of candy a lot of us have in our
among other things,
cupboards right now. Yeah, okay. Then after that, it's Ecological News. And hopefully at some point during this hour, we will hear from you at 877-909-1007. That's 877-909-1007. Call us and talk to us about any sort of ecological observation or question you have. And so this, of course, we're recording this on November 3rd, the Sunday before the massive election that the whole world is watching with bated breath. And it just got me to thinking about elections and candidates, and there's a concept that I kind of wanted to go over that unscrupulous legislators take advantage of this all the time. It's the concept of a poison pill, right? And that is, you put something in a law that like 90% of the law is great, everyone agrees with it, but you stick this poison pill in there, this absolutely unacceptable thing, that 10% of it or so, and so even though most of it is great, it fails. And one of the best examples I saw of that in my long and storied career messing around in politics was that the city of Bowling Green tried to pass a charter amendment that recognized the rights of nature. which, sounds pretty good.
Yep.
And a lot of places since then actually have done that. Some entire countries have put the rights of nature right into their constitutions. But it was a new idea back when Bowling Green was attempting it. And it was a great law. I agreed with 90% of it. But there was this one provision. It was called enforcement. And what they did in the enforcement provision was it said that anyone enforcing this charter amendment would be exempt from prosecution from any local laws. Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, that seems bad.
Yeah. Right.
I hope it doesn't include, like murder and stuff.
Well, it couldn't be prosecuted locally. Yeah.
So they're like 007, you're
Right.
saying, license to kill.
Well, yeah. If you were in the process of enforcing the rest of it as a citizen
Okay,
enforcer
right.
person, so like if you suspected your neighbor of using toxic pesticides, you could break into their garage and say "aha," and not be prosecuted for it. Which, yeah, that was a poison
So
pill.
they accidentally declared the purge in Bowling Green. Oh my.
Right. And, as I knew would happen once I saw that like more conservative elements seized on that one section of the law, and they didn't argue any of the benefits or, pros or cons of the rest of it. They just said, this is insane. We've got to turn out and defeat this. And they did. They beat it 60-40. So it had a fairly decent turnout for such a radical idea, but it was a poison pill. Okay. And there are poison pills in all sorts of things politically. For some people, there's some issues, like if a candidate has one position on an issue that they're really focused on, they can't bring themselves to vote for that issue. But the reason I'm bringing it up on this show is because there's one issue that should be a poison pill for any politician, because global warming is so important that if you have a candidate who denies it, or worse, supports it or wants to increase global warming by increasing the CO2 that we're putting into the air and the global other greenhouse gases, that should be a poison pill. All right. You shouldn't vote for a candidate who either denies global warming or is planning to make global warming worse, because that issue is putting all other issues in danger. We can't maintain our society because the global warming disasters are becoming fast and thick, and we can't rebuild faster than nature is tearing us down. It doesn't matter what their position is on, I don't know, tariffs or income taxes or, any other position. It doesn't make any difference if there's no income because there's no work, because, everybody's places of business have been torn down. It doesn't matter what percentage income they want on which income bracket. We've got to stop the global warming first and foremost, and that should be the main issue for every human being on the planet right now. And for most of the world, most people are really focused on and prioritizing global warming and stopping emissions, but here somehow that issue just gets lumped in with a bunch of other issues, and it's fundamentally different. It's fundamentally more important. Speaking as somebody who wants to bring us to a green future, I have to say that issue should be a poison pill for any. If you are considering voting for a candidate, you should look at that and consider that to be the reason not to. So just had to get that off my chest, because this is a really important election, and probably policies will be set here that'll determine what's going to happen with greenhouse gases for the next 10 years, and we just simply cannot afford to increase it. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Do you have something else you want to talk about? Give us a call, 877-909-1007. This is the best show in the region, but we get better every time you call. And this is the reason that we have this as a live call-in show, so that we can talk to you folks. Okay, so one thing that we pay a lot of attention to, because it is another key to resolving the whole global warming problem, is mass transit, public transit. And here in the Northwest Ohio, we have TARTA, Toledo Area Regional Transit Authority, and they've decided to switch over to a more electric buses, and they have an actual plan to go almost all electric. So we have a nice interview with a fella named Rick Bailey. Let's hear that interview now. Hello and welcome to For a Green Future. Could you please share with us your name and your position?
Sure. I'm Rick Bailey. I'm the Chief Customer Experience and Mobility Officer for TARTA.
All right. And I'm asking you on today because we're talking about electric buses. I understand TARTA has a project in the works to acquire some buses. Could you just give us the basics? How many buses? When are you hoping to get them and so forth?
Sure. So we have a current zero emissions bus program, and that's really our commitment to reducing emissions within our fleet overall by 2040. So earlier this year, we put into service our first paratransit vehicle, which is a smaller Ford E-Transit vehicle. We currently have 3 of those in the paratransit fleet, and we have 2 charging stations at our paratransit garage in South Toledo. And then we're also we ordered 12 35-foot electric vehicles to start running on the fixed route side. So the larger bus service at some point in probably late 25, you'll see the buses on the road driving revenue service.
All right. Well, it sounds pretty ambitious. So let's talk a little bit about those. Let's talk a little bit about the smaller ones you currently have, and then maybe about the bigger ones you're looking to get. So could you just sort of describe the ones that you have in the paratransit route now?
Yeah, so the paratransit ones are Ford E-Transit vehicles that we purchased from Tesco out in Oregon, Ohio. They're very similar to what you would normally see. It's a Ford chassis. So the vehicle from the outside doesn't look any different than a diesel or a gas vehicle. It's just really the inside, the technical aspects of it. The irregular combustion engine is now just a lithium battery. And the ones we have, I believe, are a 90, let me get that straight. They're 89 kilowatt lithium battery with a range of service up to 159 miles per charge. Now that's perfect weather, no ancillary system, so not running the heat, the AC. Depends on the number of pickups, so how often you're running the wheelchair lifts, how often you're stopping, starting. So, I think we've been getting probably somewhere around 80 to 100 since we started running the vehicles on May 13th of this year. And we really keep, most of the time, we have 2 that are in service and 1 on standby in the garage that we can swap out for the drivers to use. So, really, I think good return so far, better than we expected. But now, as we move into kind of the time of year where the weather is going to get colder, you have possibility of ice and snow. It'll be interesting to see the impact on the battery charge moving forward.
Yeah, so at least in the warmer weather, the range is more than enough for what you guys need.
Yeah, we've been getting consistently 8 hours out of the vehicles. Now, if on the extreme hot days that we had there for a small portion of the summer, we were having to bring the vehicles back in probably around that 4 to 6 hour mark to charge them and swap out for another vehicle. But I feel like for the most part, we've been getting good range on the batteries, at least on the Ford E-Transit that we have.
All right. Well, cool. So you've got to start there, but you're looking to get the big buses coming in. How much power does one of those large buses use?
Standard Gillig bus, which is what we bought, 35-foot version, comes with 444 kilowatt battery capacity. So it's basically like 6 packs of the lithium batteries. So you can kind of see the difference. So the paratransit vehicle has one one lithium battery, where, much larger vehicle, you're dealing with a lot more power draw. So you have a lot more ancillary equipment. You've got ramps, lifts, a lot more power is required to, heat and cool the vehicles
Hmm.
during the summer and winter months. So you can kind of, and you're moving more passengers, so the weight's a little different. So you need more power and torque in those vehicles to stop and start the vehicle.
Hmm. And so, what was the brand? The name of the?
They're Gillig buses.
Mhm. Are they made in the U.S.?
Yes, so they're made in California.
Mm.
Um, it's they've been around a really long time. The bus industry is, kind of been volatile, I think, a little bit in the last probably 3 to 4 years, especially around electric vehicles. So you had a lot of OEMs that were relying on secondary, companies to provide the batteries, which a lot of them have gone out of business, unfortunately. So the shift now is the OEMs are starting to manufacture their own batteries, and that way it's all in house. But still, I think with the orders, you're looking at probably around the 18 to 24-month lead time on electric larger vehicles, and that's a little different from your standard diesel bus, which is probably more 8 to 12 months, depending on the number of orders they have.
Mm. So, what level charging do these buses need? What have you got in the garage there?
Yeah, so right now we have Lightning Energy Level 2 chargers.
Mm.
The paratransit division, we have two. Initially, with the plan to go up to 20, we can install 20 charging stations in the current garage based on the electric capacity here before we'd have to do any kind of major infrastructure upgrades as far as like adding a substation to generate more power. So,
Mm. Okay, so level two, so you'd be charging overnight, basically. Yeah.
yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it usually takes about up to, depending on the charge, about 4 to 6 hours to charge the vehicle to 100%.
Okay. So, are there health benefits of switching from like diesel with their or exhaust to electric?
Yeah, I think from a driver perspective, I think there's a couple things at play. You're not the fumes, you've got the lack of exhaust. I think the biggest thing, if you actually drive the vehicles, the biggest thing I notice is the sound. There's not
Mhm.
as much kind of white noise as you would get from your typical diesel bus, because the engine's not running, the drive's a little smoother, and so I think, long term, I think there's probably some, I have no medical documentation on this, but you would probably say it's beneficial for the drivers, not only from, a breathing in the fumes, but also the sound on your hearing long term.
Mhm. So you have driven them. How's the acceleration?
Yeah, so the vehicles have quite a bit of torque. So the acceleration is very similar to what you would get from a diesel or a gas vehicle.
Mhm.
I think the biggest change from a driving standpoint is the way the vehicle regens the battery. Your typical electric, like hybrid, right? Like a Prius, for example. The braking mechanisms are really driving the regen on the battery sometimes. Whereas the ones we have, basically de-acceleration uh, helps regen the battery. So as you're approaching stop signs, stoplights, you really just need to take your foot off the gas, and it automatically starts to slow the vehicle and regen the battery.
Okay. So are you expecting to have savings in like fuel and maintenance costs?
Yeah, I think some, long-term benefits are obviously the fuel reduction. I think we're still working through what that looks like on the offset of the power draw. So you are saving on the fuel side of things, but it is an increase in your utility cost because you're now having to provide power to charge the vehicles. But obviously there's not a lot of mechanical parts So the hope is that the vehicles will stay on the road longer, and it'll be easier to do the preventative maintenance and keep them in good working condition long term.
Mm-hmm. Well, just FYI, I have a plug-in hybrid van, and my charging is equivalent to basically getting like a gas for $1.25 a gallon. So
Yep.
that's just my house. So you mentioned that you have a zero emissions by 2040 plan.
Yeah, so we have a zero emissions program. It's part of our really commitment to reduce greenhouse gases and kind of move more towards a sustainable future. So what that looks like is a transition period out of the gasoline and diesel vehicles, hopefully by 2040, if not sooner. So we're in very early stages of that. So we've got the paratransit vehicles that are in service. We've been working with our workforce development manager and our maintenance department to really develop training curriculum to train staff on how to operate, how to work on the vehicles, how to make sure safety is always a top priority for us. So I think making sure that the vehicles are in a safe location and that the employees have a safe working environment to work on them.
So how big of a start is this? In other words, this first batch of buses, what percentage of TARTA's fleet is that going to represent?
So on the paratransit side, it's about 10% of the fleet. We currently have 36 gas vehicles. So the 3 current EV vehicles, and then we're also in the process of acquiring 2 additional Ford E-Transits that should be here hopefully in December. So that'll increase the paratransit to 5 total EV vehicles. So you're looking at about 15% of the fleet at that point. On the fixed route side, we're currently at 68 vehicles. So I think we're working through, the other thing is working through what the replacement schedule looks like. So we have replacement schedules for the vehicles out to 2040. But as we test the technology, it's really coming up with, is it a 1.5 to 1 replacement? Is it a 1 to 1 replacement on the diesel vehicles? Those will be things that'll kind of work itself out in the pilot program when we run it, to get a really, really good idea of when the vehicles get on the work and are out in revenue service, what kind of performance we get out of them. And, the hope is it's 1 to 1. Most places I think are getting a 1.5 to 1 to 2 to 1 replacement. So you're having to buy about a 1.5 electric vehicles to every 1 diesel vehicle.
Interesting. All right. So does TARTA have any other plans to get that zero emissions target, like putting solar panels on your buildings or anything along those lines?
Yeah, so our Central Avenue garage is scheduled for renovations and really a transition into what I would call is hopefully a solar power producing facility. So the roof will have solar panels on it. We will probably upgrade the electrical systems to include the possibility of a substation to not only generate the power, but also to possibly use it for our non-revenue vehicles at some point, maybe offset some power for the facility as far as running the electric and other ancillary systems. So,
well, that's cool. All right, well, that's just about all we have time for. Do you have anything to add?
No, I really appreciate the time to kind of talk about our zero emissions program. I think it's something that is really important to all of us here, and we look forward to adding more electric vehicles to the fleet in the future.
Okay. So that was our interview. Thanks so much for listening. This might not have been the most exciting interview we've ever done, but I thought it was important because it's good to see the nuts and bolts of making the transition. I liked talking to the guy who was actually swapping out the diesel buses, the fossil fuel buses, for the electric buses.
Plus, he was real clear and accessible and broke things down real good. I thought.
Yeah. And so this is not this big, mysterious, terrible thing that's going to like destroy our way of living. No, it's exactly the opposite. In fact, we have to make this transition if we want to keep our way of living. So it was heartening to see that that's happening at this regional level. Okay, well, and so now that brings us it's time to say thank you, and we are going to say thank you so much to our patrons. Yes, wonderful people who've taken the time to go to patreon.com. That's Patreon. There they searched for For a Green Future. Up popped our Patreon page. They scrolled down and picked a membership level that matched their budget. And so now every month a little bit comes out of their accounts, comes over to us. And that's how we can afford to keep this show on the air, which it's vitally important that we do, because otherwise we wouldn't hear every week from Rebecca on various topics. So, Rebecca, what have you got for us this week?
Okie doke. Well, the 4th, isn't that tomorrow?
Yes.
So tomorrow is National Candy Day. So
the November 4th. Interesting. You'd think it'd be October 31st, but okay.
Well, I mean, that's Halloween for starters. It's right between Halloween and when people are getting their Thanksgiving and Christmas candies.
I see. Okay.
So it kind of makes a little bit of sense anyway. You want to get a jump on getting the absolute best Christmas candies, or maybe you don't. I don't know.
Gotcha.
Anyway, I decided to do sugars as sort of a chemical concept.
Sugars.
Yes. Sugar is a sweet-tasting carbohydrate that is soluble and used in food. Soluble meaning it can dissolve into another substance or can dissolve another substance. With sugar, I believe it's mostly dissolving into. Sugar does not dissolve things. Or else your breakfast cereal would be a whole different experience. That'd be a little frightening and not something you should eat. So yeah, sugar is soluble in alcohol, oil, and water, but most soluble in water. And sugars can be either simple or compound. Simple ones are called monosaccharides, I believe. And the compound ones, I think, are...
Polysaccharides?
Yeah, but okay, glucose, fructose, and galactose... I wrote those down as compounds. Is that right?
Sounds good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anyway, glucose is produced by plants during photosynthesis, and most algae produce it also. Mm-hmm. And the glucose syrup is the most common type of sweetener in candy in the world. And it's produced from, glucose syrup can be made from any starch, but specifically, the major one is cornstarch, which is made from this starch that's made from corn. So yeah, it comes in the form of a viscous sweet syrup. Viscous meaning thick, sticky consistency between a liquid and a solid. So, it's not textured.
I would have said something you can pour slowly, but
right.
Yeah, okay.
Don't put that as an answer on your biology test. Well, I don't. You might, if your teacher has a sense of humor, you might still be okay because it is not textured. Anyway, it's used in foods to soften texture, add volume, enhance flavor, and prevent crystallization. And the food industry loves it because it's inexpensive and prevents bacterial growth. It's produced through hydrolysis of starch, hydrolysis is a form of a reaction in which water is used to break down chemical bonds in another substance. And cornstarch also contains other sugars, including maltose and oligosaccharides sometimes. But yeah, it's the enzyme. They use an enzyme to further break down glucose to make it high fructose corn syrup. So that's how you get that. Mm-hmm. And drawbacks. Okay, there were quite a few of those. The drawbacks for high fructose corn syrup are basically the same as the ones for corn, basically. Corn uses water, pollutes rivers and oceans. Monoculture of corn depletes soil nutrients, requiring more pesticides and fertilizers down the line. It causes deforestation. Fertilizers and pesticides pollute the air, the water, the soil, basically everything. According to the New York Times, interesting tidbits, links it to kidney disease according to Loyola University School of Medicine study that came out recently. And it weakens topsoil, which means it doesn't retain water as well. And that sounds like a recipe for a mudslide, or at least more floods coming at you. And then that dirt and whatever runoff goes into the river and makes everything in the rivers and the oceans worse. And some of the results is there's currently a dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico that's all about pesticides and fertilizers runoff. Mostly from cornfields. You look at the alleged benefits, and it's all we could do it better, and some of us are thinking about it. Kind of articles like you get a lot. Okay, it could be done better. Yes, everything could. It captures carbon in the fields while the corn is growing. It's great while the corn is growing, at least. It's when you cut it down, there start to be problems and try to grow something else. And then they start babbling about biofuels. Biofuels being liquid fuels produced from renewable biological sources. Small problem, the amount of land, energy, and fertilizer used to make the biosoils makes them only slightly better than fossil fuels. And then there's the fuel versus food debate. It's like, well, that's going to make groceries more expensive. They can be made from bio waste, technically, which is biodegradable waste of any organic matter that can be broken down into carbon dioxide, water, methane, compost, humus, and simple organic molecules.
It's humus.
Humus, you're right. It can't be made into hummus. No. Hummus sort of looks like mud, but it isn't. It tastes much better. And some of these processes would be like digestion of bacteria and composting. And also I missed a bad side effects. It tends to create new deserts, corn monoculture, because you cut down the forest, you use up all the nutrients, you move on. There's a desert, and at best, you're going to get fewer plants over time because the fields become less and less fertile from growing corn on them. And then you have less carbon absorption because not as many plants. So, yeah, we probably need to cut back on the high fructose corn syrup for all kinds of reasons.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks for that report. And that seems like good advice, cutting back on the high fructose corn syrup. All right. Next, on to ecological news. And we got a fair bit to get through today. So we're going to start looking. There was a story in the Truth Out website, and the title is How the Dutch Climate Movement Won an Environmental Breakthrough. And we reported on this last year when it happened. From September through October of 2023, there was massive civil disobedience in the Netherlands. They blocked roads. They had 25,000 people participating, and they had like 6,000 people got arrested. And the point of this article this year is they're looking back at it and analyzing it and saying it was a lot more effective than many other climate movements. Like the people that are throwing tomato soup on artwork and a lot of other, some people are like gluing themselves to roadways and bridges and so forth to block traffic. And it was a pretty thoughtful analysis, and I thought it was kind of interesting to just look at what happened in the Netherlands there was actually more effective than a lot of these other protests. And one of the reasons was that everything was focused on specifically on just ending public subsidies for fossil fuels. That was it. They picked one topic that pretty much everybody could agree on, because, nobody really thinks that oil companies should be getting all their tax dollars in addition to all the dollars they put in their gas tank and so forth. And so they focused on that. And the trigger for it was actually pulled in 2020 when a group came out with a study. They looked at government figures, tax revenues and so forth, or tax expenditures and so forth, and they said, okay, we are subsidizing our fossil fuel industry here at the rate of $5.4 billion a year. And they started a campaign saying, look at all this other stuff we could do with $5.4 billion. We could expand our rail lines to more cities. We could provide better public health care. We can do all sorts of things with $5.4 billion a year. And that got everybody's attention. And it turned out that the subsidies for the fossil fuels were higher than what the government was spending on climate change. They were subsidizing the fossil fuels more than they were encouraging rooftop solar.
No, but they were, in fact, spending the money on climate change.
Oh, true. Just on the wrong side.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Good point. On causing climate change instead of opposing. Yeah.
Right.
All right. Thank you for that. Good point.
It's exactly what they spend it on.
And so, that caught people's attention, and public sentiment was turning over towards we shouldn't be giving these highly profitable petroleum companies even our tax dollars in addition to all the money they're squeezing out of us. But that attention actually triggered more attention from the press. And then, a few months later, another news outlet came up with a story that, it's not 5.4 billion, it's actually 17.5 billion.
Oh my.
And then people are like, what? Because that's, it's a small country, so that's a huge chunk of their budget.
Yeah, buy myself all the high fructose corn syrup I wanted with that.
Right. But then that sort of triggered a press frenzy, and all the press started paying really close attention, and they figured out, no, it's actually $49 billion a year. So, a lot of the subsidies were hidden, hidden inside other subsidies.
Right.
And so you really kind of had to research and tease it out. And once they did, then, everybody in the country was like, why are we giving them $49 billion a year? And so part of what happened with the organizers of these protests is that they focused on participation rather than disruption. So a lot of the protests in Europe and stuff, you'll have scientists gluing themselves to a road, and they pick the busiest road. And so half a dozen people attach themselves to the road and stop traffic for all of London for 8 hours or whatever. And that is very disruptive, and people are kind of like, I got to get to work. I agree with these folks, but this is really a pain in the butt. And so what they did was, instead of focusing on the disrupting, they focused on getting as many people out there as possible. And they had, basically they turned it into a very festive kind of atmosphere. They had people playing music. They had an orchestra. They had jugglers. They had people coming and entertaining. And they very carefully chose where they were going to do this. And when they did it, there was a road that it leads past the main office building where all the oil and gas lobbyists inhabit.
Okay.
And then it went under a tunnel, and then it went to Parliament.
Okay.
And that was actually the end of the road.
All right.
So by blocking off the end, they were only inconveniencing the oil and gas lobbyists and the politicians who, no coincidence, they're so close together there. And it also was right next to a park, which acted as the staging area. And so what would happen is more and more people kept coming because it was fun.
Right.
You'd go and you'd see the music, and, there were people giving yoga classes. And so you'd go spend the afternoon there, and you wouldn't necessarily be one of the people who goes out to block the road. And mostly these protests happened on the weekend too. So it was not really disrupting a lot. Then once they got the large numbers coming, then they increased the frequency, and they started doing it during the week. They had smaller numbers, of course, because people didn't have the weekend off, but they kept it all light and they kept it fun. And that's how they escalated it up to September through October of 2023. And that's when they had the crowds of 25,000 people, and 6,000 people ended up getting arrested because, as people did this more and more, they came to believe in it more and more. And finally, thousands of people both blocked the roads and they did it daily. So they did it every single day, September through October. And what happened at the end of that is that the parliament, the ministers in the parliament, because by now the public perception, the figures on the polls and things were like more than 80% of the people in the country agreed with the protesters. And so finally, the ministers in parliament forced this issue onto the floor of the parliament. And, Denmark said that, okay, we're going to start winding these, we're going to start phasing out these subsidies for the oil and gas industry. So they declared victory and departed the field, basically.
Right.
That was another thing. So they left when everybody was really popular. Now, unfortunately, what happened right after that is a bunch of right-wing parties took over the government. Now, it was so popular, ending these subsidies was so popular, and actually not subsidizing private industry with public money is a conservative principle.
Yep.
And so the conservative government that came in said, "Oh yeah, we'll continue it. Yeah, we're going to lower these subsidies. So you could elect us, and don't worry, we'll do the same thing that the more liberal government was going to do." They haven't done it. It's been a year later, and they're still promising to do it, but they haven't set a timetable for when they're going to do it. So they may have to go back and re-poke these people, but it was just an interesting examination of how to effectively sort of change things in a country like that. So,
And you know what they say: if you have a ring but not a date, you are not really, in fact, engaged, except in highly dubious theory.
I see. Right. Yep. Okay. So now on to another this is a good news story. All right. Okay. Unequivocally good news. This is on a website called drillordrop.com, and it was October 28th. The title is, quote, "Unlawful, quote, oil production halted at Horse Hill." And this is Horse Hill, which is in Surrey, England. And this is a story, it's kind of the follow-up to something that happened this past June, and that is the Supreme Court in the United Kingdom said that the environmental impact statement, or they call it the Environmental Impact Assessment, the EIA, over there in the UK, for this oil and gas drilling on Horse Hill was insufficient because they did not take into account the effect of the greenhouse gas emissions that would be created from the oil that was used. Okay, so in the past, oil companies have gotten away with their environmental impact statements only looking at the well. Okay, we're going to drill this well, it's going to leak this much, it's going to cause this much damage, but we're going to offset that with this much whatever. So what a whole bunch of environmental groups did was they came and said, oh, but you also have to take into account what the effect of burning that oil that you're pulling out of the ground is going to be.
Yeah, because that's kind of important.
Well, I think so. And so did the Supreme Court of the UK. But it caused a tremendous shakeup of the fossil fuel industry, because if they actually have to list out what the damages are going to happen because they're being allowed to do these drillings, that means that's a whole lot more damage is going to have to be accounted for, and it makes it much harder to get permits and so forth. And so the judges threw it out. They said your EIA was insufficient. This was past June. The problem is that they just went ahead and drilled anyway. Yes, they just, they're like, we can't accept this, so we're just going to ignore it. They started drilling. And so a whole bunch of environmental groups and people got together, and again, they had to protest, and they also got brought to court by the Friends of the Earth, and the Supreme Court again said, look, we told you this is not allowable. Your EIA was insufficient. And just last week, a spokesman for the oil company said, it's not unlawful. We would not be doing it if it was unlawful. But
so by definition, it's lawful. Whatever we want to do is
whatever
lawful.
we do is lawful.
Yes.
But
so they're like the Pope now, basically.
in their mind, well, they were
Yes.
last week.
Okay.
But this week they said, okay, we're gonna stop. They said, okay, we're voluntarily stopping, and they finally
Our
stopped
wording.
the oil production. And so now the full EIA has to get created, and that's going to take another year or so. So it's nice they actually did manage to stop oil drilling at a location in the UK. So we got to celebrate all these little victories.
Yeah.
All right, next story. And this is a story from bloomassociation.org, or should I say bloomassociation.org. And the reason I said this with a French accent is this is actually a French website, and it was this story was published on October 29th. And I have to do a disclaimer. I had to use my French, which is, I'm no means an expert, but I had to use my French to translate this article. And I'm going to say it in French, and then I'll say it in English. In French, contamination au mercure Bloom révélait un scandale de santé publique d'une ampleur inédite. All right, what that meant was mercury contamination. Bloom reveals a public health scandal, a secret scale. And essentially, they did an 18-month investigation into canned tuna all over the EU. They bought tuna from stores in Germany, England, France, Spain, and Italy. And they tested it for a whole bunch of stuff, and they found a bunch of really nasty stuff in there, including arsenic.
Oh, dear.
Yeah. But one of the main things they found was that there was a ton of mercury in there.
Uh-oh.
And looking at it, now, it turned out that the mercury was within acceptable levels, but they did a little research and found that secretly the acceptable level for tuna had been tripled compared to the acceptable level for any other kind of fish.
Okay.
Yeah, and there's no...
So mercury magically doesn't hurt you if it comes via
from
tuna
tuna.
fish? Okay,
Right, yeah.
whatever.
Exactly. And there was no explanation, no justification. They just did it, and they used the word arbitrary. It was arbitrarily done, and the article suggests that it was done to protect the tuna industry because the levels were increased to match the amount. So they found 100% of the samples were contaminated. 57% were contaminated higher than the acceptable level for other kinds of fish. And one of the cans that was bought at a store in Paris had 13 times the restricted levels.
Oy vey.
But the main thing is that they really believe that this is part of our support for the tuna industry, because it turns out that Europeans eat a whole bunch of tuna. On average, people in the EU eat 11 pounds of tuna per year. So that a lot of very sad people in EU probably finding out about this levels of mercury. Now, mercury is put into the oceans by things like burning coal and fossil fuels. There has been limits on the amount of mercury put in. We've been since the 90s. The amount of mercury we've been putting into the oceans has been dropping steadily because we have put in place regulations. Unfortunately, even as the amount of raw mercury going in, the amount of methyl mercury, which is the mercury that is biologically your bodies can absorb and get poisoned by, the amount of methyl mercury has increased, even as the amount of raw mercury has decreased. And nobody knows why this is. There's a whole bunch of theories. It could be bacteria. It does seem to be associated with increasing temperatures. So maybe just the heat turns more of the mercury into methyl mercury. Some think dead plankton might be giving it off into the environment. Acidification of the ocean also seems to be a factor. But mercury is nasty stuff. It bioaccumulates. And that's why tuna, which eat pretty much other critters, has so much of it in its tissues. So bad news for mercury. And my apologies if my translation wasn't very good, but I did the best I could. Next story. This was from our friends at Yale Environment 360 on October 28th. Title, Pollution from Gas Stoves Kills 40,000 in Europe each year. Now, that's a little bit of an exaggeration. It's a slight fooling around with the wording, because what the actual study shows is that the pollution from the gas stoves decreases people's lifespans by 2 years on average. So people who have gas stoves in their houses live on average 2 years less than people who have electric stoves or who don't have a stove. And so the main culprit is apparently NO2, nitrogen dioxide, but gas stoves also produce benzene, carbon monoxide, formaldehyde, and microsoot.
Ooh.
Yeah. Now this study of the stoves in EU supports a study that was done in the U.S. earlier this year, published in Science Advances, studied by somebody named Yanni Kashtin. And that study showed that households that had gas stoves had higher rates of pediatric asthma and shorter lifespans too. So
People like gas stoves because they heat up faster, right? That's the big attraction.
they heat up faster. You can control the heat better.
Okay.
You could roast marshmallows and hot dogs on it with a fork. I've done that.
Right.
They're pretty blue flames.
Roast your
pretty.
tortillas.
Yeah, I mean, people like gas stoves for a lot of reasons. I mean, I like gas stoves too, but here's a clear thing here. If you have gas stoves, it puts stuff into the air that's going to damage your health, and it also produces more CO2. So
that's a problem.
So switch over to something better. Just switch over to an electric stove. It's not as much fun as a gas stove, but it's also less dangerous than a gas stove, because everywhere you have a gas connection in your house is a place where that natural gas could leak. So
very true.
So I've switched to electric, and I have not regretted it. So, and these new electrics that they have are even more energy efficient than the old resistive heaters, and so you can really save a lot of energy, which means saving a lot of money, and you can live longer. I mean,
2 years.
if that's important to you, adding 2 years onto the end of your life there, it's kind of nice.
That's a couple Christmases,
Yeah, a couple Christmases, couple 4th of July, couple Halloweens. Think of all the additional Halloween candy you get to eat if you live 2 years longer. Yeah,
Sneak in one last christening or graduation.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay. Next story. This one you've probably heard about on the mainstream media if you pay attention. There has been terrible flooding in Spain, in the area Valencia, right? Yes. More than 200, at least 225 people dead. The number of missing. I spent a lot of time this morning trying to nail down the number of missing, and I saw estimates from 1,200 to a couple dozen. And Le Monde basically said no one knows how many people are missing. So it could be...
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, it could be, there might end up being over 1,000 people killed by this rainstorm. In one town, they got 11 inches of rain in 8 hours, which is the equivalent to the amount of rain they normally get in an entire year. And the scientists in Europe and all over are all in agreement that this was a climate-enhanced disaster, that it's much worse than it would have been if we didn't have climate change. And one of the biggest economic impacts of it is 11,000 acres of greenhouses were destroyed. And this region of Spain actually produces about 30% of the produce for all of Europe. And once you wreck all that many greenhouses...
That's the term Valencia oranges.
Yeah, Valencia oranges. You really are starting to affect the food supply. Prices are going to go up. It's going to be much harder to get fresh produce in Spain, or in all of Europe, because of this disaster in Spain. And again, this is just a foretaste. This is just the beginning of the process.
Lots more where that came from.
So if you like to eat produce, you should be worried about global warming, and that should affect your behavior, both in terms of what sort of cars you buy and what kind of stove you've got, and who you vote for, in my opinion.
Yes.
Okay, and a little bit of supporting information for that. Our next story, it looks like there's going to be a very weak La Nina. And so what happens is we just finished the El Nino period, which gives us hotter, drier weather like we had all summer and continue to have with our drought here. But normally what happens is after you have an El Nino, then the flow kind of reverses and you get an La Nina, which gives you cooler, wetter weather, except this year the La Nina has not formed. And we might be going from hotter, drier back to hotter, drier again without a cooler, wetter in the middle. Now NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, is still predicting there will be a La Nina, but their prediction was it was supposed to have started back on October 8th.
Whoops.
And it has not started.
Well, it's going to be, well, how would you say that? It'll be, instead of El Nino and La Nina, it'll be El Nino and El Niñoso.
Right. More.
The really big boy.
Right. So they were wrong about when it would start, and so now they're predicting, okay, it's still going to start maybe in a couple weeks, but it's going to be very weak and very short. So that has a lot of impact, especially like in places like India where they had an incredible heat wave during the summer. They were hoping for a cool winter, but no.
Bet they were.
Now it's going to go to a warm winter and then to a even hotter summer, because this is what we call a
positive feedback loop.
Yes, the positive feedback loop. You start out at a high temperature, you go around through winter, and you come back at a higher temperature, and then you end up at a higher temperature than that at the end of that summer, and so forth. So really bad. Okay, last story. This is just sort of a look ahead. 1 week from today, the COP29 conference on global warming happens in Baku, Azerbaijan. Expectations are terribly low because it's being run by an oil baron, literally, a fellow named Iham Alitu. And this year they're going to focus on money. They're going to focus on getting money to the countries that are getting destroyed by global warming. Unfortunately, as Douglas Adams says, most plans that involve making people happy involve moving around little pieces of paper.
Yeah.
And the little pieces of paper are generally not the ones that are unhappy.
Yeah, it's kind of weird.
So we'll report more on that next week. That's it for this show. Thank you so much for listening. This is Joe DeMare.
And Rebecca Wood.
We are signing off.
I don't want no oil, a spoil in my shoreline. I like fish much better than crud. I like birds and things a creeping and crawling. Won't trade no more oil for blood. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that black demon oil's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. I don't want them nukes run by them kooks who think radioactivity is fun. No more three-headed frogs or kids with leukemia. Nuclear power ain't fit for a dog. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that nuclear power's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. No nukes!